And welcome to the pilot episode of my poker vlog. My name is Ben Dietz. Thanks so much for joining me. This is something that I've been wanting to do now for quite some time, and I'm glad that I finally got around to doing it, and I really appreciate you joining me on this journey. I know that poker on TV is something that used to be huge. I think everyone of my generation got into poker because of it. And I think that's kind of gone away now in terms of what people actually do. Internet-based options like vlogs, I think, are really what's taken over. And I really wanted to get involved in that. I am not a full-time professional poker player. I think that's something that'll kind of set me apart from other vloggers. I do have a day job. We'll get into that coming up in a little bit. Now, I do consider myself still, though, a poker pro. I just don't play every day and as many hours as most pros would that don't have jobs to go with it. I play Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, and that's pretty much it. Occasionally a game will come together midweek here in Reno that's worth jumping in, but it doesn't happen too often. So I pretty much stick to those 3 days, and it's gone well for me so far. So I'll talk about my actual job coming up here later on in this vlog, but this is first and foremost a poker vlog, so let's get to it. All right, guys, a couple of hands here, starting with 3-5 no limit hold'em. That's the case here in Reno. It's, I know, usually 2-5 or 5-5 elsewhere, but in Reno, they go with the old 3-5 structure. So a couple of hands from 3-5 before I ultimately went and made the jump into the 5-10 game, which started a few hours after the 3-5 did yesterday. So the first hand, I look down at pocket fives, and I see the player to my direct right, who is a guy that I know very well and is a very solid player. He makes it 20. I make the call at pocket fives, and the big blind, who is the opposite of a tight player, goes ahead and makes the call as well. So we see a flop three ways with $6 in the pot, and to use a term that's become popular here on these vlogs, thanks to Andrew Nemi, the flop comes pretty favorable. Jack 5-4 rainbow. The original raiser in middle position bets after the big blind checks. He bets $35. And again, I'm looking to keep the big blind in this hand. He's a guy who does not like to fold too many hands, so pretty much any pair I'm expecting him to call with. I just go ahead and smooth call the 35, and the big blind calls as well. So we go to the turn with about $165 in the pot, and the turn comes the king of spades. And the original raiser now checks. And that's after the big blind checks as well. So I go ahead and make a value bet here of about $70. And the big blind goes ahead and makes the call. So after the original raiser fold, which I fully expected him to, we are heads up to the river, and with about 300 or so in the pot, the river comes a 3. The board now is Jack, King, 4, 5, 3, and I have pocket fives. The big blind checks, and in this spot, I am looking to get paid off by a number of different hands here from a guy who does not like to fold too many hands and plays a very wide variety of hands. Obviously, if he had a king, I could pretty much bet pot and expect to get called, but given the fact that the king didn't come until the turn and he called me on the flop, pretty doubtful that he would have that, so I do expect him to make this call with any jack. Obviously, if he has 2 pair or better, he's going to call a pot size bet as well, but I don't think that he does too often given the action at this point, so I go ahead and just bet 100. I slide in a stack of red, and he goes ahead and makes the fold. So not sure what he had. I don't think he's going to have a jack too often there, knowing how he plays, but I take down a pretty good sized pot nonetheless. In this next hand, 3 people limp in, and I'm on the button with Queen Jack of clubs. Pretty good spot for me to raise, I would say, so I go ahead and make it $35. The small blind and 2 limpers both call, and 1 limper folds, so the pot's about $150, and we get a flop of Queen 8-7 with 1 club. It is checked to me, and I bet $70. First limper calls, and the small blind calls, and the first limper calls, and 1 of them folds. So we go to the turn with the pot now, about 360. The turn is the king of spades, and at this point I'm trying to figure out if it's still a spot I should bet. I'm actually thinking that it probably is if no one bets in front of me. However, that's not the case. Not only does someone bet in front of me, the player first to act in the blind, who is an older gentleman that I think I may have played with a few times but definitely do not know well, he shoves all in. And that is a bet of about double the pot. He has about 700 in his stack, and he just moves it all in. And it proved later on that this could have definitely been a spot where I could have called, considering he showed later to do that with a draw. That's actually how he ended up busting on the day. I saw him jam the nut flush draw into top pair, top kicker. He was called, and he ended up losing. So it's possible that he could be doing something similar here. However, at that time, I didn't really have that read on him. I thought he was one of these type of guys that is just going to want to protect the best hand when he has it. And if he did have something pretty big here, he wouldn't want to get drawn out on, and he would just go all in. So I fold, everyone else folds, and he takes it down. Not sure what he had. Next hand here, we get a limper under the gun, and I am in middle position with pocket kings. I raise it up to $25. Both blinds call, and the limper calls. So we see a flop 4 ways with $100 in the pot, and the flop comes Jack Deuce 5 with 2 diamonds. It's checked to me, and I make a fairly small bet, a little under half the pot of $45, looking to keep in, obviously, anyone with a jack, but maybe if either one of these guys have a pocket pair over the 5 as well. Definitely at least 2 opponents in this hand tend to play on the looser side. So I'm looking at that as much as anything here. So anyway, I bet $45. Only the big blind calls, who's definitely the loosest of the 3 players who had made the call. So he could pretty much have anything here. Obviously diamonds, he could have a jack, he could have a 5, and he would even call me, I do think, with a deuce in his hand. So the turn comes another deuce. It comes the deuce of spades. He checks, and I go ahead and bet $75, and he makes the call. The river comes inarguably the best card in the deck for me. It is the King of Diamonds, giving me top full house and completing the front door flush draw from the flop. I, at this point, am now hoping that the small blind has diamonds in his hand, but instead he checks, which to me would indicate that he probably does not have diamonds, but you never really know. So he checks. I still am going to bet pretty large here, hoping that he does have the flush, but I think that there's a decent chance that he would still call me with a hand like ace-jack. So I make the bet of $200, and he doesn't waste any time and calls. So obviously I'm good. He does not show, and I win a pot of a little over $700. He goes ahead and shows his hand to his opponents. Not quite sure what he had, but obviously after he showed it to his opponents, I became a little more convinced that he may have checked a flush to me on the river. So at about 2 o'clock, as it does most Saturdays, a 5-10 list was put together. And it's not a game that I always jump in. There are several pros that come up from Las Vegas that I would prefer not to play any hands against, as good as they are. But in this case, those guys were not here. Still a few local pros that I know pretty well were in the game, but I go ahead and jump in as well. And that game ended up being a really good game going deep into the night. Unfortunately, I do not have as many hands to report from it as I do from the 3-5 game, but there was one hand that I want to point out. It's a hand in which I opened pocket queens under the gun. Player middle position calls and the big blind calls for a pot of $90. We see a flop three ways of queen 9-4 with 2 spades. The blind checks to me, and at this point, knowing the players in this hand the way that I do, I think there's a decent chance that if I check, I'm going to get a bet out of the player who called me in middle position. So I go ahead and check, hoping to get a bet, and that's what I get. He doesn't bet huge, though. He bets 100. And I then see something that definitely catches me by surprise and allows me to kind of reevaluate how I'm going to play this hand. The blind check raises to $300. So now I'm left wondering how to play this. I'm sitting here with the absolute nuts on the flop. I've now been check raised to 300 after a bet came before that. So hard to know what these guys have. Obviously there are several draws on the board, but with about $700 left in my stack after I call this 300, I decide that I want to try to get all the money in this hand, and I want to try and do it against 2 opponents. So I just call the extra 300 there, and the player in middle position calls as well. So we go to the turn with about $1,000 in the pot, and the turn comes the 8. So front door spades do not get there, but Jack 10 does get there. The small blind, the big blind goes ahead and jams all in. He has both of us covered, me and the player in MP1 both have about the same amount of money in front of us. We both have about 700 each. And the big blind has us both covered. He goes all in. I am not folding here, so I make the call. And the player in middle position snap calls. That was not a good sign. He ends up having the Jack 10 for the turn straight. The river comes off a deuce, but it does not matter, as I cannot beat the nut straight, obviously, when the board does not pair. The big blind would later claim to have a flush draw, which definitely makes sense. That didn't get there, so the other player in the hand triples up. Definitely a hand I would like to have back, obviously. Trying not to be too results oriented on it, but when I looked at the fact there are 2 players putting money in a tough game, probably a good idea to do what you can to get your money in when you have the best hand, to say the least, not to get greedy with it and to try to play a 3-way pot when there are several draws there that can beat you, and that's what happened to me there. Ultimately, though, I ended up having a pretty good day in that game. Actually won about $1,100 in the game, so pretty good action, to say the least. Played deep into the night on Saturday night, much later than I would normally play, but the game ended up being pretty good, so didn't want to leave with that in mind. So definitely a good Saturday at the Peppermint. Yep, you saw that right. 2:30 in the a.m. Most poker players think that waking up at 9 a.m. is early. For me, waking up at 3 would be sleeping in. This is my commute to work, which today is quite a rainy one, but never features any traffic, which shouldn't come as a surprise. If you're walking, here at Colo 8 News, where I am the morning show live reporter, basically doing different stuff every day. All right, wrapping up live shots for this morning. Actually a pretty cool morning to do live shots, considering what I'm talking about is a very cool topic around here, the Nevada Wolfpack basketball team in the Sweet 16.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Shannon. I'm here in downtown Reno, where as you can see behind me, the Silver Legacy's dome is going blue. Only the second time in school history they've made it in there. Playing tonight against Loyola, Chicago, and this entire town is buzzing about it. That's for sure. Kind of a miserable live shot in terms of this rain, but other than that, it's been pretty cool. The downtown casinos going blue. This is the Silver Legacy right over here. The dome is traditionally green, but they changed it blue for the Wolfpack today. Anyway, basically the way that it usually works for me, I get into the station at about 3 a.m. The show starts at 4:30, so it doesn't give me much time, but sometimes I know what I'm doing that day, sometimes I don't. So I have that time to prepare and get something ready to go. The more you get done the previous day, the easier it is, but again, you don't always know what you're going to be doing. A lot of the times it's weather coverage, a lot of the times it's breaking news, and a lot of the times it's stuff that you put together on a story that's one you can run anytime, like my Silver State Sites series that I've been very proud of. The ability to go to different places every day is definitely the cool thing about the job. Sometimes you just never know what's going to come. There have been a lot of cool live shots like that that I've been able to do over the years. My favorite one ever was when we had a Chick-fil-A open up, and I actually went live to talk about the Chick-fil-A. But the funny part was Chick-fil-A had not wanted to open up a branch in Nevada. For years they said they would never be here. And the way I understood it was they were against legalized prostitution in the state. Well, literally while I am at Chick-fil-A, someone drives a semi-truck into the famous Moonlight Bunny Ranch brothel. And I then went there. I actually interviewed a hooker on live TV. I'm not making that up. And the legendary Dennis Hoff, too. Talked to him as well. So, a company that had protested having business in Nevada for years due to legalized prostitution in the state, I did a live shot there, and an hour later went live from the Bunny Ranch. That was a memorable day.